You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Why do origins matter? Today we're going to be talking about Doctor Who Flux, their Halloween special that came out for the beginning of this series of the 13th Doctor. We're going to discuss why Joe does not like this iteration, and we're going to talk about why origins with the Timeless Child matter. We're going to assume, if you're listening to this, that you're familiar with the characters and with Doctor Who, so this isn't necessarily for beginners. Hang on, though. It'll be a fun conversation. Welcome to Systematic Geekology, episode number 11. We are the Priest to the Geeks. And of course, when we say that, we don't necessarily mean anything by it other than we're just trying to be mediators from the faith to the culture. That's all we mean. And this isn't a trap. We're just two guys who enjoy Doctor Who, or don't enjoy Doctor Who in some cases, and we just want to talk about it. And again, we just want to plug, you guys can go over to patreon.com/systematic geekology, and you will see some after shows. We're going to be doing some geek debate series. Joe and I are going to get into it a little bit with this episode, but we're going to do a bigger debate on whether or not the 10th Doctor in Rose is the greatest love story of all time, which I say it is, and he says it definitely is not. So go over to Patreon, check that out. I am Joshua Knoll. I am a podcast host of the Whole Church podcast, and I today have been binging like the behind-the-scene Disney movies that are on Disney Plus and just learning all about how Disney World and Disneyland was made. It's been a blast.
I am Joe. I am a co-host of Buddy Walk with Jesus, as well as a broadcaster and marketer. And starting today, actually, my wife and I are going to be going through all of Star Trek: The Next Generation, from including the movies, including all of the TV show.
Nice. You'll have to let me know. Are the movies are all of them after, or are they kind of like mixed in with the show?
Mixed in.
Okay. Well, I need to look up a timeline because I've been trying to start it, but that is not what we're here to talk about today. It is a great show, though. Definitely think everybody who hasn't checked it out should check it out. Although I like the original Star Trek movies better, but that's a different conversation for a different time.
Again, you are very, very good at being wrong. Wow.
I certainly try. And speaking of wrong opinions, I'm just going to start, and we're just going to briefly give my pros and cons for this episode. I'll do a 0 to 10 rating. I'll let Joe do his. I am big in the minority because I did like this episode. But as with everything with this 13th Doctor and the current showrunner, I just don't love it. As far as the pros, I really liked Yaz's character development. I thought that was really cool. I always like the 13th Doctor's acting. Just her presence on screen is fun for me. And overall, it was kind of cool. It was the first time in a long time Doctor Who's got me excited about anything. So they showed this new villain that I'm like, hey, I would like to know more about you. But because I know the writer's not as good as Russell Davies, who's coming back next year, I'm just kind of like, I definitely could wait till he's back because I know it'll be good when he's there. And having that looming over that's one of the big cons of this for me, is knowing what's coming makes it really hard to be excited about anything with this. They definitely threw way too much into one episode. However, it did kind of remind me of some of the more classic Doctor Who's where it just had a name of the series and it's just all a series, like multiple parts to one big story, basically. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, no, the dialogue was awful. Like whoever was writing their, like what they're going to say, like the trick or treat line, I was like, this is bad. And there was a lot of just really cheesy, unnecessary things added. And the dog race, I forgot the name of them already. It would have been cool if they did that 50 years ago. But now it's like, where have they been this whole time? This makes no sense. How are we going to have another species linked to our species that have just not been present in, according to canon, we've had the Doctor for thousands of years since the first episode, and these have just never showed up. That I don't get that. So overall, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I didn't hate it. And I might go back and change it if they follow through with this story and they do a great job with this villain. They might surprise me, but I don't have a ton of faith in what's going on right now, so I'm going to keep it at a 6.
So to me, this episode was just empty calories. And this is what I mean. It simultaneously felt like too much, and yet it was nothing. You get done watching it, and it was all cupcake and nonsense. And so you're left with like, did I even eat anything? Yeah, thousands of calories worth of stuff, but it didn't satiate me at all. Every single time that Jodie Whittaker opened her mouth, I heard circus music. Just she was like a clown. She just like laugh it up chuckles. Like it honestly, I would prefer Matt Smith over this. Like it's just the most nonsensical quippy garbage that like, and yes, before all of you Doctor Who fans out there come up against me on this one, I understand that the Doctor is quippy. I get this. But stopping the scene just so you can get your cheesy, terribly written, really bad one-liner in will 100% take a person out of the scene. That's the thing is like, it just, when she stops and delivers these lines, I don't know if it's just the depths of how bad the writing is, or if it's that in combination with the fact that like Jodie Whittaker can't act her way out of a brown paper bag. But to me, it just, when she stops and delivers these lines, it's like, hey, get it? I'm looking down the camera. Hey, get it? It's fourth wall breaking. Get it, guys? It's meta. No, man. Like to me, so much of what this was so paint by numbers. Like it reeked of a first year show writer taking a template from Google and saying, how do I do an episode of a sci-fi TV show? And I'm going to check this box and I'm going to check this box and I'm going to go down systematically throughout the entire thing. But at the same token, like, this is the same person that wrote the nonsense and the absolute garbage of The Timeless Child. So, terrible. It breaks it literally breaks all of continuity. Like, it's been around for thousands of years. I don't think so, Tim. Like, that literally makes all of old Who irrelevant. It makes all of it not worth actually watching, and it goes against so much of what was already established in the lore. I'm a huge comic fan. I'm all for a good retcon. I don't care. I'm good with that. You can pick and choose where you retcon here and there, but when you go in and you just break the timeline, I'm done with this, and I'm gonna go ahead and break an arm off this toy. That's not retconning. That's just bad writing.
I really feel like it explained so much, and it actually fit a lot better. Like the whole timeline of how the Doctor was half human, but we really weren't sure how he could be half human, given what we knew of his origins. This kind of explained that, and that was cool for me.
When you have this thing that is so in a particular direction, and then you see the direction fly off the first time with Matt Smith. And fascinatingly enough, that's the one that's in contention for the next worst season, but I digress. And then you start to course correct with part of Peter Capaldi. Peter Capaldi's the biggest thing that he suffers from is terrible writing. Outside of that, I think his idea for a Doctor was actually very, very compelling. And then you get to this, where they can't shut up long enough about whatever agenda they're trying to push. in order to, I don't know, tell a compelling story, I don't know, maybe that's what we're supposed to do on a weekly TV show, is tell a story that's worth actually turning into. Yeah, no, I can't. I cannot bring myself to go any higher than like a 3. Maybe if I'm not being so cynical one day, you might get me at a 3.5 if I've had a particularly good morning. But yeah, no.
Okay, so getting to the debate part of this, and it could be because I've watched Broadchurch and what's the British version of that? Jodie Whittaker is in those two, and I really feel like she's a great actress. I think she's giving awful dialogue in this series, but I also feel like this series has a lot of bonuses outside of her for me. Like, I think the filmography is beautiful. I think this has been the most beautiful looking Doctor Who has ever been, just from an aesthetics point of view. But if I wanted to just see pretty pictures, I could go downtown to the art museum. And the story has existed. I think a lot of, for me, is like the nostalgia is still there. I hear the TARDIS. They still have bits and pieces that I like. I like the idea that they tried to make sense of how the Doctor could be half human, but they never sold me on anything. Like, I was always like, okay. Like, it was always just barely good enough for me to keep watching. And that's sort of where I'm at with Jodie Whittaker's run with the Doctor. And I do not blame her.
I will absolutely agree that it was pretty. That I will give it. It was hard to stop and appreciate that when this was, like I said, just a very formulaic episode of Doctor Who, like, you know, beat for beat for beat. Yeah. And
do you feel like it's been formulaic the entire time he's been writing?
Probably, yeah. I wouldn't be
surprised. Because I've never pinpointed why I have such a hard time getting excited with this writing and stuff. Because I've never, again, I never thought it was bad, but I've always just kind of been like, this isn't exciting.
You know, and honestly, because I would venture to say that if you are any kind of fan of legacy Doctor Who, everything that you've known and loved, for the most part, has been reworked or dulled down or done better than previously. They showed the Weeping Angels there at the end. Okay,
that was cool.
No, it wasn't. Like, that was very much a break glass in case of a boring episode sort of thing. Like, it just was. Like,
I just like the Angels.
Right. They're a great idea, but they're a great idea just like the Daleks are a great idea. And the great idea is only great if you make them menacing. It's the same problem that happened with Anakin Skywalker in the prequel trilogy. You took all sense of appeal and mysticism or anything like that was intriguing about this character, that this big menacing character, almost larger than life in the original 3, and then you made him a snivelly, whiny kid. And like, I get it, you're supposed to see the progression and all of this kind of stuff, but like, no. It's the same idea with the Daleks. It's the same idea with the Weeping Angels. It's the same idea with a lot of these beats, that even down to, you know, to get real nerdy here for a second. There is a type of television that is from Japan called tokusatsu, which is like Power Rangers, that kind of thing. That's all tokusatsu. Japanese show with American interlay. You know, if you ever notice, the cutaway scenes are from the Japanese show Super Sentai. The American scenes are originally shot for Power Rangers. There was this thing that kept happening, and part of why a lot of tokusatsu kind of left, and like that kind of live action sort of deal left and kind of fell off, was because you saw the difference between the Japanese stuff that was like, the props were really good a lot of the time, things like that, and the American stuff that looked like people were playing with toys. And that's literally what so much of that episode looked like. It looked like people playing with toys. And I'm like, no, like the scenery was pretty, but like the weapons or anything like that, the equipment all just looked like toy props. You know what I mean?
I like that they got the angel back to where instead of it trying to like show the angel moving and like what they did during the Matt Smith years with the angels, like how it looked, just thinking aesthetically. I like how they went back to the original look for the angels. That was nice. But also the thing with this kind of episode for me, they had so many different streams, right? If this was Russell Davies, or heck, if this was Stephen Moffat and all of these pieces were there, I would be excited because even with Stephen Moffat, you know it's going to come together in at least an exciting way, even if it's dumb. But with this writer, I'm like, I see all the pieces. I want to be excited, but I'm also just cautious with him. And again, just having it looming over that this much better writer is coming next year, it makes it almost impossible to get into this. Because I'm like, no matter what happens this season, I know there will be a next season and that I will like it more.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm hoping like for me, I don't necessarily have a big qualm with shows that have a different morality track than me. Like, I'm a huge fan of the CW shows. Like, am very much, there's tons of people that could sit here where I am on those and say a lot of the same stuff. They're formulaic, they're this, they're that, agenda fill, all of that. Yeah, you're probably not wrong with a lot of that. But for me, those kinds of shows, while it comes up every once in a while, it's the IP first. And the problem is they're so with this iteration of Doctor Who, they're so not IP first and have gone to such a degree to try and rally fans against anybody that doesn't see it that way, that it's hard to get in. They're into it. Like, they're not telling a compelling enough story to actually hold my interest enough to overcome all of the nonsense that's associated with it. So you've essentially created this high barrier of entry for a lapsed fan, I guess, to get into it, or for somebody that is, if you ask most Doctor Who fans, where would you point a new person? They point him to like Tennant, or they point him to Matt Smith, or they point him to one of these tentpole doctors, where when you look at this, it's just kind of mediocre and it's just kind of okay. And like, unless you're talking about a full scale rewrite from once Davies comes back, there does come a point where a writer can kill a show beyond repair. And we've seen Doctor Who go on the shelf before. And I'm not saying it would be gone forever, because its premise literally lends to being able to reboot it, which cool. But there is a point of no return where people will just stop tuning in, where it's just not worth it. You know what I mean? When you are so heavily relying on your core fan base to get you through, rather than creating new fans, you're doing something wrong. And that's exactly what I feel like they are counting on with these kinds of things, while throwing in like those little nods and different things like that like, oh, hey, look at that. Look at what we did. Are you happy with us now? Nope. You're still trash.
Yeah. Which this is one of those where I do think it just comes down to taste for the most part. I can stand it. I like it enough to watch it. And that's pretty much it. Like, I wouldn't defend it and say it was great or even good. I can stand it. There's been so many parts of it that I've liked. And not even whole parts, but like, bits and pieces. I like what they did with the Angels, for example, right? I like the idea of the timeless child. I like the idea of Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor and how she was trying to get her inspiration from Tennant because she was so close to him. Like there were so many good like ideas. The filmography, I've mentioned that before. It's just never all clicked in a way that was fun and exciting like the show usually is. But that being said, for me, and this is just for me, it's still a much better show than most other shows out there for me. I would still rather watch this than Stranger Things Season 4. Sorry, everybody. And even if Stranger Things 4 might be better, I still would prefer this just because it's Doctor Who and I have a love for the show. And that's pretty much all it comes down to for me.
And that's and that is fantastic that you have found an IP that you resonate with and all of that. That's fantastic. The problem becomes when people like that, when that is your audience base. You're not finding new fans. Yeah. You're not pushing new boundaries. It's just people that like, but I'm nostalgic for how I used to feel about Doctor Who, so I'll watch it until I feel that way again.
Yeah, which has honestly been a thing since Moffat came in. And we had a few good moments with Smith, and Capaldi was a great Doctor in a not so great story half the time. But I do have faith that the show will get back with Russell Davies coming back, and I'm excited to see what that's like. It's been a long time since the show has been at the caliber that I expect it at. It's much like how I feel about Solo, the Star Wars film, where I'm like, man, that was not a good Star Wars film, but man, is it better than most other movies. What I did want to do, one of these pieces that I liked that you did not like was the Timeless Child. I found the idea interesting, and I feel like the reason it was so controversial among fans even was because we're all so interested in the Doctor's origins, right? Like, is he half human? Because, even that's been debated. We're not sure, did the Master lie? We're not sure if the Doctor left that evidence in the TARDIS to kind of fool him, which, for those who don't know, that was first mentioned in the Doctor Who movie, and that's what I'm referencing right now. Because I feel like even people who are familiar with Doctor Who haven't necessarily seen that movie, so... That's for you guys if you're wondering where that came from. It came from there. It's in a couple other episodes with Capaldi, and some of the audiobooks mention it, but it's never been delved into. So we've always kind of just had this question mark of, is the Doctor half human? And now that question mark's leaning more towards yes. And that's pretty much what we got from Timeless Child. But even outside of that, like, we all like a good superhero origin, and bring it to the real world. People love arguing because they're so passionate about, old Earth or young Earth creationism, or Christian evolutionist, or, not Christian evolutionist, or even your own origin. I know people who don't have a fond memory of their childhood, and that infects their entire life. And I have people who don't remember a lot from their childhood, and they found something out about it, and that's shaken them to their core. Why do origins matter so much to us, Joe? Why can't we just... what's happening right here, right now? Who cares about yesterday?
Because I think for a lot of people, it's tied into what is your identity? Where am I from? When you are asked, who are you? There are a handful of go-to things: occupation, where you're from, nationality, things like that. And so we kind of want to figure out who we are by figuring out where we come from. That, and from a cosmic sense, I think it's a lot of people trying to make sense of what this world is and everything that all of the unexplained. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So one thing when we get to the origins of the world, and because I'm careful to do this with the whole church podcast, and I don't want to ruin my whole church fan base by telling them what I believe on certain things. So I'm going to keep this a little vague. But I do find it fascinating how important the creationist arguments have become amongst Christians, and how a lot of what people outside of the church, that's what they know about the church, right? Is that we argue about creationism. Like, that's like one of the main things they know about us, that, and that we hate people. which, that second thing we could talk another time. But what's weird to me is the fundamentalist papers back like less than 100 years ago included a Christian evolutionist. At that point, you could be a fundamentalist and believe in evolution. And that's just not the case at all now. Now it's like you have to buy completely one side or the other, and it all comes back to this question of origin. And I want to know, when did we start placing such an importance on that? Like, why has that changed?
I think it's a couple fold. If you ask the common person, like average everyday person, about evolution, about what their take is on evolution, they will think likely that you are immediately talking about our the idea that we came from apes and that all of that kind of stuff. Evolution has so many different forms. Like there's microevolution, there's macroevolution, there's so many different. Evolution is so nuanced that on both sides it becomes this thing that you either believe in evolution or you believe in creationism, and that's part of the pop behind it. This big rivalry that people have talked about, and this and that. Like, I think it's just a long time of people building something up without actually fully understanding what it is that they're talking about. And with that, we also live in a day and time where there's tribalism, that everything is tribalized. Everything is soundbite. Everything is me versus you. And if you don't agree with me, then you're against me, sort of thing. So it's easy to develop the mentality of, I have to be right about this. This is truth, sort of thing. It's kind of like end times in that regard. There's a whole lot of people that have a whole lot to say about end times, but I've said this for ever since I had my come to Jesus moment. I dare and challenge a single Christian to present proof of their side to me that we are any closer to the end of days than the people that walked with Jesus. I challenge anybody. You could throw theories and ideas at me. 3 ways from Sunday. I understand this. But it's one of those things that you cannot prove. It's almost like the Bible said something about man not knowing the day and time. So I think part of it is us outreaching ourselves. I think we aren't necessarily meant to understand as much as we try to understand.
Yeah, so my take on this, I really feel like to a lot of degrees, it's just we want to have the other. We want to have someone to fight, basically. From my understanding, it wasn't until like the Stokes v. Monkey case that all of a sudden evolution creation was a big debate because they had to make it a legal thing, and this guy's bad in teaching that the Bible's not true, even though the Big Bang was created by a Catholic. That's who came up with that theory. Yeah. But and like so much of it is like, okay, and even on the other side now, some people say I'm a Christian evolutionist, which all of a sudden means that I can't believe the Bible, any part of it literal. I can't believe this or that, which means those Christians are the bad guys, or even atheist evolutionist. All Christians are bad because they think creation. Well, that's first off, that's not true. And second, that doesn't logically follow. Like, I don't understand how both sides get to this point where it's like, what your arguments don't make sense. Just because they disagree with you on how it started does not make them the bad guy. And I feel like we do that with our own origins. Or like, this is an actual example. That's kind of cool. This is a dumb example, but there are more real examples to go with this. Like, when I was a child, my parents had to cut bigger holes in the nipples of the baby bottle because I could not eat it quick enough. So in my head, I've always just ate fast. So that's why I eat fast, because I've always ate fast. And we use that as like a certainty because it's always been this way. It has to be this way. And I think some people use their past with their families and stuff as excuses. And yes, it does cause psychological trauma. And yes, there are issues, and sometimes that will always stick with you. But also, to an extent, we can't base everything off our origins. It does affect where we are now, but I don't think we can base every part of our life on that. I don't think we should base every part of our theology on that. It is important, but it is not the most important. And that's just where I'm coming from.
I am all for, there's an extent to, I'm going to say, cultural significance. I'm taken back to this story that I heard of missionaries in a certain part of Africa, that when they would tell people about the gospel, they would not use the very standard American language of Jesus is knocking at the door of your heart, which is problematic to begin with, but whatever. But because knocking at the door in that culture meant that you were about to get robbed. If it was your friend, or if it was somebody that you knew, they would stand outside of your home and holler to see if you are home. But if they were going to knock, it was somebody that was casing the joint, that was, knocking. Huh. Yeah. So we can. So there's a measure of recontextualization that has to happen sometimes, and I'm good with that. So to fit what makes sense to a person's culture and all that kind of stuff.
I have a fun example for that. I forget what country it is, but in one language that they translated the Bible, and apparently it was this huge controversy to people in America, but they translated Jesus saying he was the bread of life to saying he was the potatoes of life, because where they were, bread was super expensive. Right. And they were trying to convey that Jesus was available to everybody. That made a lot of people mad. That's what I was thinking of when you were saying that. I was like, the potatoes of life.
Here's the thing, right? Like, without jumping on to a soapbox and sermonizing, I think one of the biggest things that humans struggle with wrapping their mind around, we talk about how much we love God. We talk about how much reverence we have for God. We talk about all of this, but we have a hard time talking about, what does God think of me? What does God think of the creation? And that's one thing that I always preach, is the kingdom. Because we could sit here and tribalize about this, that, or the other thing. I could sit here and explain to you why I do not for a single second believe in young earth creationism. Somebody else could look at things and say that they do believe in young earth creationism, and they might even use some of the same, evidence that I have, or whatever. They're just recontextualized. Okay, at the end of the day, doesn't change a single thing about salvation. So cool, good. You believe that. I believe this. I think eventually we'll get straightened out.
Now it sounds like we're on the Whole Church podcast.
Right. But at the end of the day, we are all part of the same kingdom. We are all part of the same community. And that's something that gets lost a lot of times with these sound bites and these echo chambers. You have these different platforms where people will sit there and argue their point and argue their point and argue their point. Well, if you're speaking truth and nobody's standing there to listen to you, what are you doing in the first place? So like sitting there barking about a thing just because that's what you believe doesn't necessarily do any good to anybody, to the kingdom. And I think part of that is understanding what God thinks of his creation. That we are not the main characters of the story. God is the main character of the story. And God is so gracious that he loves us. And so that two-way street changes everything. It's not just about the respect that we have for him. It's taking his opinion of us and his creation into consideration. And that should have an effect on how you argue with other people or how you get along with other people. It just should as Christians. And so understanding all of that and understanding where we fit in does a whole lot to change how you view your identity. As somebody who I can take this from an alternative point of view for a moment. I grew up. What's the old saying? Gypsies, thieves, and scamps, something like that. Like it's an old saying about like less than savory people. I come from less than savory people, and so like I'm not my sister and I being saved in our family is a big deal because a lot of our family is not saved. And more people have died of a drug overdose than have lived full natural lives. That's just the deal. And so when you say things like, that's my identity, that's where I'm from, you have to take that into consideration. What are you speaking over yourself? What are you inheriting when you say that? So it goes beyond just basing it off of because I'm Italian. It goes well beyond just this is where I'm from. When you're talking identity, you're talking about something way more deeper and sorry, let me say that because I can English well. You're talking about something that's way deeper and way more nuanced than just where am I from? What do I do for a living? You know what I mean? And I think that that's part of where man will always struggle with that because man inherently struggles with identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And, yeah, you said that well. I did want to throw out there because we both were kind of hinting at what people do with origins and staying one side or the other side and that whole tribalism thing. One person I found really interesting who gets a lot of flack from all sides is Tremper Longman III. He actually writes a book called The Controversies of the Old Testament, and he's done a lot of scholarly work. He's worked on the ESV and CSB and a bunch of different Bible translations, and he has changed his mind throughout his lifetime, which is why he gets flack. So many people were like, we thought you were on our side. He's like, okay, well, I studied more and I learned more, and I don't think I agree with that anymore. And so in that book, he reveals that he believes in evolution, but he also still thinks the Bible is against same-sex marriage. And he thinks the Bible teaches real history, but he calls it biblical history. And it's like half one side and half the other, because we always put both these things in, one of two sides. And it's a good example that we don't have to be that. We can be nuanced. We can think things through, come up with our own opinions. You can change your mind as you go throughout life. And I think that's probably a healthy and valuable thing. So I think everybody should check out that book because he likely disagrees with you on something.
So even without, let me take it back to the Bible here for a minute. Not that I'm against people going out and reading an external book, but I think that we need to be able to turn to the Bible to be able to support these things. I am a big proponent of apologetics. I am actually in the process of working on an article that only uses commonly accepted atheist arguments to verify the death and resurrection of Jesus, to verify the empty tomb. Because nice. I think you can do it. I think you can do it very successfully. And that requires looking at the Bible as more than just this religious document, or that it's separate from human history. If you stop and look at the correlation between science and biblical event, you see that this is it's evident. There is proof at that point that these people existed, that this time existed, that these things happened. There comes a point where you choose to become willfully ignorant about some of these things. And that's why you see the highest levels of this form of debate nitpick rather than trying to wholesale say, this is this, this is that, because they realize that so much of this leans in the favor of the Bible. So people who stand against the Bible will try and use other areas to nitpick. But the further you go down that road, and the further you take this, and with a skeptic's mind, compare this to history, the more you realize that there's proof text here. There is a setting that I can put this behind to know that this is some of the things. Yeah, we're not ever going to know all of it.
Yeah.
But at the same token, there's so much of it that can fall into place that allows a whole lot of other things to fall into place.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever heard of Richard Friedman, but he is a Jewish scholar and author, and one of his critiques of archaeology in general right now, especially in the Middle East, he says, is if it were the other way around, if we had all of these pieces they're digging up, then all of a sudden they dug up a Bible, they would be using that to prove what all of this stuff is. But because we've had the Bible so long and it's have all this religious context, they're like, oh, we can't use that. That doesn't tell us what these are. And he's like, well, it doesn't make sense that if you would have found it afterwards, you would have used it, but because you found it before, you won't.
Right.
And that's I always thought that was a good critique. Now, to bring this back to Doctor Who, even, I think that's also what the show was trying to do. I think that's why they tried to go back to the origins so that they could come up with this new villain from her origins. And it's just one of those. It's annoying that people have to go back to the origins and they have to have certainty and they have to go into that. This is exactly how it happened. And thus these are the bad guys. And when we look at the Bible and instead of doing a Bible verse, I'm going to do a Bible book. So the entire book of Job, God is a lot's going on, but near the end of the book, a large part of it is God talking to Job. And he says, where were you when I did all this? All these terrible things are happening to Job. Job doesn't understand it. He's questioning God. And God goes, I am the origins. You weren't there. No one knows how it happened because only I know how it happened because only I was there. And I think a large part of it in the church and in the world is we want to have this certainty. And we have a hard time accepting the fact that sometimes there is mystery. Sometimes it is okay that we don't know if the doctor was half human or not. It is okay that we are not 100% sure how Anakin became Vader. I would have been okay not seeing that. And it is okay to not have all the answers for the origins of the universe, to not remember your first birthday, to not relate everything back to your family. It is okay. Yes, these things can contribute and help you understand things. But also, there is mystery, and sometimes mystery is good. And sometimes we have to accept the fact that only God knows. And that's where I'm kind of landing with this. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts to tag on to that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things, there's, major in the major, minor in the minors, you know what I mean? Like it's very important to understand what hill you're going to die on. You're never going to hear me die on the hill of any particular point of view of the end times or creation, but I will die on the hill of the empty tomb 110%.
Yep. Yeah. That is, yeah. Amen. So with that being said, then, I think that is a good place to kind of transition into our wrap up. You guys, I would encourage you to check out Joe's podcast because it doesn't mean as much when he says it. But Buddy Walk with Jesus, they go all through what exactly the tomb does mean and what does it mean to be a Christian in today's world. It's a valuable input to your life today. They might not tell you the origins of the universe, but they will tell you the origins you need to know about and what to do with your life now. So for the wrap up, we always like to start with recommendations, and man, there's so much I could recommend. I want to make mine a little. I'm gonna do a weird one, I guess. For if you have been into the new Who and you haven't really seen a lot of classic Doctor Who, try and find yourself a copy of The Five Doctors. It has the first 5 Doctors of the classic series. And it's a really compelling story. Happens on Gallifrey. It's pretty cool looking for something that's as dated as it is. So I'd say check that out. What about you, Joe?
Mine is not Doctor Who related. Mine is, I have been listening to the second season of Marvel Wastelanders, which is a podcast produced by Marvel. That's like an end time, or not end times, like an apocalyptic future, bad guys win sort of thing. And the world building that they do in that is it's exceptional. So I would definitely suggest that. First season was centered around Star-Lord, which I thought was very good. And they're about halfway through the Hawkeye season.
I will say that is a show that will make you laugh and make you cry and is awkward to listen to at work, and I do it anyway. Oh, man. Yeah, it's a great show. So before we go, we do want to let you guys know where you can find more of us. And you actually can go to systematicgeekology.org, hit host, and each host has their own page on there that shows you pretty much everything we do. But you could also go to the Whole Church podcast, wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, and you will hear my other podcast with my co-host, TJ Blackwell. Joe, where can people find you?
Anywhere you find podcasts. Also on Facebook, you can find me at Buddy Walk with Jesus.
Awesome. Next episode, we will be talking about Marvel's What If, and that will be a fun talk. We're going to do a little bit of What If with the Bible, and I will be back for that, as well as Brandon Knight and Dan Stewart as the hosts. And then you can go to our website in the description to let us know what you've been geeking out on and what we should be. And remember, guys, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.